What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you something a little bit different with a first look at a game called The Lift, which, if all goes according to plan, was announced yesterday from the time of this video, because the developers asked if I wanted to dive in and take a look at an early demo that they had been working on. And the reason I chose to do so is that this is actually being developed by some of the people that worked on Ori and the Will of the Wisps, as well as Pathologic 2, which are themselves popular games, and that combined with the fact that I felt like this was a pretty unique game overall made me want to jump into it. But what actually is it is probably a good place to start, and I would describe it primarily as a narrative-driven puzzle type of title. However, the game itself chooses the descriptor of a first-person handyman simulator, and in fact what they're going for here is combining the gameplay elements of things like House Flipper with more occultish elements via things like the SCP Foundation and like Soviet-era sci-fi. Now, to drive that a little further home here, our actual goal is to play the role of a keeper. A keeper's job is basically to repair everything in their given service area in an effort to keep away something they call the decay, which is kept deliberately vague, but appears to be some supernatural force that is destroying things in the absence of people, acting against the entropy, I suppose, which is our job primarily. You are first given a little test via a lift, if you would believe it, which turns out to just be a training mechanism, and after you complete these initial tasks to pass the training, an individual behind a bit of glass gives you what they are calling a bug, a tablet more or less that'll keep track of everything that you've got going on, and then they tell you to go into hibernation so you can be sent to the research facility that you're going to be upkeeping. However, immediately things go sideways here, and when you wake up from this hibernation pod, something has clearly happened, and your sleep in that pod is what spared you from death, presumably, given that nobody else is around, and some sort of mysterious event has occurred that has caused the station to be grown over with all of these strange growths. Now, after you get the initial puzzles solved and get out of here, you'll be met with a very, I would say, liminal type of space where you're actually going to run into your first other person, with this one being called the Traitor, who shows up in a particularly dramatic fashion and then puts on a weird puppet show. This Traitor gives you some incredibly cryptic replies, but also opens the way forward while basically explaining that clearly something has happened, everybody left, you seem to be the only survivor as it turns out, and that you're going to very obviously play a role in the story of whatever this place happens to actually be. Now, shortly after this, you run into some other people who are apparently being sent by the Bureau, I guess, in an effort to help stabilize the research facility after all this time has passed and whatever happened here happened. So it's clear there are going to be plenty of people along for the ride, and at least vaguely it is implied there will be choices, at least towards the end, that determine the outcome of this story. So potentially some choice and consequence there. Now, outside of these honestly eldritch and strange happenings that are bizarre at the very least, in terms of actual gameplay, as has pretty much been alluded to and you've likely seen on screen, it's basically just repairing stuff. Things big and small. Now, on a very simple side of things, it's kind of a very tactile feel. At least on PC, you'd basically use the mouse to make actual movements once you've clicked onto something, and then perform the action to actually fix whatever it is you are fixing. Now, on the basic side of things, this is just like putting screws back where they belong, or changing out light bulbs, very basic things, but they do get a little more complicated. There are plenty of things like circuits, as an example, that you will have to complete to get electricity flowing from one place to another. This is often used to fix machinery like vending machines, which can then be utilized via tokens to give you simple things like supplies you need to fix other stuff. You get tokens by picking up these strange shifting objects and chucking them into the trash along with other stuff in order to get the tokens to get the stuff you need to fix things. But what's interesting are the slightly more elaborate machines, some wonderfully sci-fi things that have to be properly powered up from either more elaborate circuits or just more interesting machinery overall. For instance, there's this generator on one of the big floors you get to that has to be filled with these things they call bees, which seem to be some sort of battery-powered thing that also kind of looks like a bee for some reason, that then powers the generator, which gets some of the power going here. which kind of leads to some of the core gameplay. Basically what it looks like is that the research station is made up of various floors. Each floor is going to see you needing to just repair basically everything you come across in order to fill some meters to make progress throughout the rest of the base. And then along the way, you're going to be met with all these strange happenings and characters to move the story forward as you try to find out what actually happened here. You will also eventually get access to what is the title, basically, which is to say a lift that is going to take you between various levels of the research facility, which they mention will be the go-between in terms of like multiple biomes, quests for the various NPCs you'll be running into, which is apparently going to be a thing, and then they also hint that there will be some things that are deeply hidden here as well, that presumably you'll get access to. Now, while what I played in terms of this demo had relatively simple machines to fix, with some of the more complicated ones being like circuits that required you to place little motors on the circuit and then power those up and kind of fit everything in. They've alluded to the full game having slightly more elaborate stuff, like having to repair generators and satellite dishes, which will involve multiple components, big elaborate circuits, that kind of thing. So it does kind of seem like if you're really into puzzles, this might be a game for you specifically. But what's drawn me in more than anything else, and the reason I decided to make this video, is how interesting I found both the story setup and the kind of overall vibe they're going for here, and also the gameplay around the controls and how sort of, again, tactile they make the feel of actually repairing the stuff, which is an interesting thing to be able to convey in the medium of a video game. And to that end, while I don't expect this to be a particularly big game, it's doing some things that I thought were interesting and worth shining a light on, and hopefully that shined through in this particular video. So with all of that said, I certainly hope you enjoyed this. If you did, I'd love to hear about it down in the comment section below, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.